drug-related violence has infiltrated all parts of society and all parts of the country. It's affecting everyone, and it is absolutely everywhere.
La vía democrática no funciona.
Otra opción hay.
January 2011, 28 people were killed and 16 of them decapitated as the Sinaloa cartel rivaled other trafficking organizations in Acapulco. But El Chapo and his men would take credit for these murders, setting off a wave of violence that turned the tides against them, changing the course of their lives forever. Here are the 10 deadliest cartel wars of all time.
This part of Chapas is the heart of a turf war between Mexico's two most powerful cartels.
Violence in the Mexican state of Chiapas is fought by Mexico's two heavyweights, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel and the Sinaloa Cartel. It's like Roman Reigns going against Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. The only difference here is the battle doesn't end with a championship belt. This leaves behind a trail of bloodshed and fear. Thousands have been on the run, and many more have been killed as both cartels fight for drug trafficking and migrant smuggling routes that go all the way to Guatemala. May 26, 2023, between 600 and 1,500 residents flee from the communities of La Candelaria, Laerio, and Benito Juarez in Frontera Comalapa. And then on January 15th, 16th, and 17th of 2024, over 3,000 residents from these same communities were displaced due to the brutal clash between these cartels, with over 60 people losing their lives in the process. So at this point, you're probably wondering what's driving this war. Well, it might interest you to know that the violence here was ignited when Chiapas became a key smuggling route for drug traffickers. Previously, this was controlled by the Sinaloa cartel, but by 2021, the CJ&G began challenging that control, unleashing a wave of violence on Sinaloa territories. The Sinaloa cartel fought back fiercely, as the profit made from Chiapas was unlike anywhere else in Mexico. You see, back when they were in control, the Sinaloa cartel charged up to $100 per person smuggled across the border, and per day they smuggled hundreds of Mexicans through that southern border. Now, for anyone who was unable to pay, they would either get kidnapped for ransom or killed. Moreover, the cartel imposed a hefty tax on local farmers and small businesses, taking up to 30% of their net profit for protection. In simpler terms, we see that Chiapas became a lucrative money tree for these drug traffickers, and the CJ&G wanted to share the spoils. Back in 2017, El Mencho and his cartel teamed up with local officials to smuggle cocaine through these routes, and years later they seized full control of these channels. Some say they got the nerve after El Chapo's incarceration sparked minor conflicts within his cartel, but whatever was the reason behind that bold move, it has plunged Chiapas into chaos. Now, the Mexican army has been deployed to escort families back to their homes and restore their lives. So yeah, to some extent it might be safe, but the new question is, for how long?
Ciudad Juarez lies on the front line of Mexico's war on drugs, and its people have paid the price.
So far this year, 88 women have been killed. Most of them were drug-related cases. Their ages ranged from 25 to 33.
The violence that has erupted here has really gotten out of control.
With 326 murders in August alone, Warz, Mexico, has earned the reputation of being the most deadly city in the world.
Ciudad Juarez, Mexico is labeled as one of the most dangerous cities in the world, even deadlier than Afghanistan, with thousands of lives lost to cartel violence. But it's funny how just a few years back, Ciudad Juarez was the Mexican equivalent of Las Vegas, hosting famous Mexican singers and film stars at its bars and clubs. Today, it's a mere shadow of itself, as hundreds have disappeared and more than 10,000 have been killed. This nightmarish transformation was driven by the relentless violence and ruthless ambition of one man, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, and the notorious Sinaloa cartel. Let's go back to January 1st, 2008, marking the beginning of the cartel war in this city with the death of one cop who was found lifeless in his car. His body was riddled with bullets, and despite the significant attention his death brought, more and more dead bodies kept piling up almost at every corner. Later, it was revealed that the Sinaloa cartel hitmen had moved into the area, attempting to seize control of the borders connecting to El Paso, Texas for drug trafficking activities. So at this time, these borders were under the control of the Warz cartel, led by Vicente Carrillo Fuentes. But El Chapo needed to outpower Fuentes because gaining control of Ciudad was crucial for his expansion. However, Vicente swore to fight the Sinaloa cartel to his death, resulting in the deaths of about 5,000 to 12,000 people. So the Sinaloa cartel teamed up with gangs like Los Metzicles and Gente Nueva to increase their offensive power, while La Línea and the Barrio Azteca gangs would aid the Warz cartel. Now here's the twist. The war could easily have ended in a stalemate. However, some sources claim the US government helped El Chapo win, and we'll explain why. You see, during the war, the number of deaths in Ciudad Juarez skyrocketed from 300 in 2007 to over 3,000 in 2008. And of that number, most of it was caused by the Warz cartel. There are also reports saying that the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, processed visas for Sinaloa cartel informants trafficking drugs through the border, pumping out millions of dollars to fund the Sinaloa cartel's efforts during that war. And to prove that theory further, one former Sinaloa cartel chief, Mario Nunez Meza, alias M10, who's said to be responsible for over 380 murders, was allowed free entry into the U.S. to meet ICE officials while carrying out illicit activities. While for Vicente and the Warz cartel, many of their leaders got captured or killed by law enforcement sent down to subdue that violence. And after this long and blood-filled 2-year battle, U.S. intelligence said that El Chapo was winning this war because at that point, he had confidently gained total control of all the drug smuggling routes around the Ciudad Juarez border.
Si andas de hocicón, se te mocha la lengua. Si andas de dedo, se te mochan los dedos. Si metes la cabeza donde no te llaman, se te mocha la cabeza.
Starting out as a faction of deserters from this elite military unit working for the Gulf Cartel, the Zetas rapidly transformed into one of Mexico's most formidable and dreaded criminal syndicates. These guys reached a point where they could compete with the Sinaloa cartel. However, their explosive rise sowed the seeds of their own destruction as they would become embroiled in this devastating war against other criminal organizations, a war that ultimately tore the cartel apart from within. Back in 1997, a dramatic shift occurred when 31 elite members of the Mexican Army's Airborne Special Forces Group defected, becoming hitmen for the Gulf Cartel under the command of Ociel Cárdenas Guillén. And by 2002, the Zetas' original leader, Lieutenant Arturo Guzman de Cenas, known as Z1, was killed. And following Cárdenas' arrest and extradition of the U.S., the Zetas seized the moment to become an autonomous force. Under their new leadership of Heriberto Lascano, alias El Lasca, or Z3, the Zetas, though numbering only around 300, would establish independent networks for drugs, arms, and human trafficking. These guys underwent rigorous military training, honing their logistic skills to surpass other elite squads from rival cartels that lack such experience. They also earned this reputation for their advanced weaponry, cutting-edge communication technology, and military-like discipline operations and intelligence gathering. Now, unlike other cartels, the Zetas thrive on terror rather than alliance. They're extremely violent, like the infamous August 2010 massacre of 72 migrants in Tamaulipas, instilling profound fear into their rivals. They would seize control of territories with military precision and exploit every criminal opportunity possible. The Zetas are known as the first militaristic drug cartel in Mexico, introducing this new era of organized crime that the world had never encountered before, leaving authorities grappling with how to respond to this. By August 25, 2011, 8 operatives from Los Zetas stormed into a Monterrey casino in Nuevo León. They doused this place's entrance, carpets, and slot machines with gasoline before swiftly fleeing the scene. In mere moments, that casino was engulfed in flames, resulting in the deaths of 52 individuals. A few months later, hundreds of people were kidnapped from San Fernando by members of the Zetas. And just weeks after, these abductees were found buried in mass graves, with authorities uncovering over 190 bodies. In May 2012, just outside Cadereyta Jimenez in Nuevo León, authorities stumble upon a gruesome scene with 49 headless bodies scattered along a highway. According to official accounts, a faction of Los Zetas had brutalized, mutilated, and beheaded these victims to send a chilling warning to their adversaries. These documented attacks, orchestrated by the Zetas to combat their rivals and make a statement, would end by 2013 because they began falling apart. You might be wondering why such a systematically coordinated group would fall apart, but the reason for their split up wasn't far from the reason behind their rise. You see, after becoming arguably the largest cartel in Mexico, the leaders began finding it difficult to coordinate all these factions across the nation. Plus, there was fighting between the Trevino brothers, who were in control, which led the cartel to break up into two factions. And today, without a unified national leadership, the Zetas have fragmented into smaller groups and mostly independent local factions, each running its own operations and forming its own priorities and alliances. Some of these splinter groups have grown stronger. However, they're not as formidable as the original organization. And while they still have some kind of influence, they lack the potential for any strength the Mexican government wouldn't be prepared for.
Authorities in Mexico say 10 bodies have been found scattered around the once popular tourist destination of Acapulco.
It's a level of brutality and tragedy that is very, very difficult to get your head around.
The once glamorous city of Acapulco, now infamously dubbed Mexico's murder capital, has been engulfed by relentless cartel violence for over a decade. These once immaculate beaches have now been morphed into battlegrounds, bustling streets have become graveyards, and tourist hotspots have been transformed into war zones. But this brutal conflict isn't a mere duel between two cartel factions, but a fierce multi-front war involving the Sinaloa Cartel, the Beltran Leyva organization, Los Zetas, and La Familia Michoacana, all in a constant struggle for control and dominance in the area. January 9th, 2011, over a dozen decapitated bodies were found outside a mall in Acapulco, with a note that read, "For those who attempt to enter this plaza, this is what will happen to you. Sincerely, the strongest cartel, El Chapo Guzman." The day before, 6 bodies were found inside a taxi, all shot at close range, with 2 victims having their throats slashed. These gruesome discoveries were part of this ongoing cartel war in Acapulco. The conflict erupted when the city became a key transit point for the Beltran Leyva organization, or BLO, and the Sinaloa Cartel to smuggle marijuana and Colombian cocaine to the U.S. Acapulco's bustling tourist industry and the high demand for marijuana fueled this illicit trade, making it a lucrative hotspot. However, the smooth operations of the BLO and Sinaloa Cartel would draw envy and hostility from other criminal groups, notably the Zetas, who were then aligned with the Gulf Cartel. Now, this rivalry escalated into a violent confrontation in January 2006, resulting in a fiery shootout, leaving numerous vehicles in flames and bodies strewn across the streets. The brazen attack was a clear message to the residents of Acapulco. The cartels were here to stay, and they were willing to unleash brutal violence to assert their dominance. So as President Felipe Calderon intensified the fight against organized crime for the next decade, Mexican security forces, with support from the U.S., would target cartel leaders, shattering their networks. And in Acapulco, this resulted in a fragmented landscape of competing factions. The assassination of a key Beltran Leyva brother in 2009 gave rise to new groups like the Independent Cartel of Acapulco, the South Pacific Cartel, and La Varedora. From there, other smaller heroin trafficking groups and criminal organizations from other regions also joined the bloodbath party. And with the recapture of El Chapo and the collapse of other dominant cartels in the region, smaller gangs expanded into other criminal activities like kidnapping and extortion. So this surge in crime has forced approximately 2,000 businesses to shut down and has driven away even more residents and tourists from that area. But what's Acapulco like today? Well, today, the violence in Acapulco affects a wide range of victims. We have people caught in gang clashes, business owners resisting extortion demands, to those who are inadvertently crossing into rival gang territories. It's safe to say that the war in Acapulco is still on. And although the murder rate has dropped from the peak of over 900 homicides per year up to 2016, these killings still happen, and at a troubling pace. The future remains uncertain, with no clear end in sight. 2008. A fierce conflict erupts between the Beltran-Leyva organization and the Sinaloa cartel, marking the violent end of the Federation, Mexico's most powerful mega cartel. Now, this split shocked Mexico not only due to the thousands that died in casualties, but also because of the Beltran-Leyva brothers' betrayal against El Chapo. Yet El Chapo managed to navigate this split in his favor, making his cartel the most influential criminal organization in the region. And this is how he did it. Back in the 1980s, El Chapo and the Beltran-Leyva brothers, Alfredo, Arturo, Carlos, and Hector, broke into the drug trafficking business in similar ways. They all started off as hitmen and distributors for the Guadalajara cartel. Alfredo Beltran-Leyva, the youngest of the four brothers, had a romantic relationship with El Chapo's cousin. And during his imprisonment in '93, the brothers would support him by bringing suitcases of cash, and later would help facilitate his escape in 2001. By 2002, the Beltran-Leyvas would also play a significant role when Guzman united 25 major drug trafficking factions to form the Federation, a coalition aimed at trafficking drugs northward and expelling the Gulf Cartel from the east. They were also involved when internal conflicts with the Warz cartel caused the Federation to begin fracturing in 2004. And despite emerging tensions, Alfredo, Arturo, and Hector, referred to by authorities as Tres Caballeros or the Three Gentlemen, remained central to Sinaloa's drug trafficking and corruption networks, until something sinister happened. In 2007, rumors of an alliance between the BLO and the Zetas began circulating. The Zetas were breaking away from the Gulf Cartel's control, and despite historical tensions, their dominance of the eastern seaboard complemented the BLO's control of the western coastline. At the same time, there were also whispers that Guzman and his discreet associates were unhappy with the celebrity status of the Beltran-Leyva brothers. Arturo and Alfredo Leyva were frequently seen and photographed with their chief security officer, Valdez, and they often attended extravagant events with soap opera stars and renowned Mexican singers. The following year, Alfredo Beltran-Leyva, who was married to El Chapo's cousin, was captured by Mexican military. Now, his arrest was said to be a backdoor job orchestrated by El Chapo, who they say began seeing Alfredo as a liability. And when Chapo's son, Ivan Archivaldo, was suspiciously released from jail, it was clear El Chapo had traded his son's freedom for Alfredo's, and that, my friends, kick-started the BLO-Sinaloa War. Determined to avenge their brother, the BLO launched an onslaught against the Sinaloa cartel's base in Culiacan, Sinaloa. Thousands of people were murdered, including El Chapo's 22-year-old son, who was shot dead by up to 20 gunmen as he was leaving a shopping mall. The violence quickly spread to Mexico City, where two high-ranking police officials were killed in May 2010, shocking the nation's elite. And by the end of May, Culiacan alone recorded 116 murders, 24 of them police officers. Nationwide, there were 493 drug-related deaths that month, 64 of them police officers, and setting a record at that time. In response, the federal government deployed over 2,000 troops to Sinaloa to combat this escalating violence, but the Federation had already fractured, and there was little the government could do to stop the conflict. The BLO solidified its alliance with the Zetas and posed a significant threat to the Sinaloa cartel for a while. However, Guzman regained the upper hand after government troops killed Arturo Beltran on December 16, 2009, and the BLO's internal discipline has been deteriorating ever since.
A balazos catalogado en la historia de Nayarit como el más impresionante. Dejó como saldo hasta el momento de 29 presuntos sicarios muertos y 3 más lesionados en la carretera federal 15.
Un total de 10 camionetas quedaron abandonadas con signos de violencia, mismas que guardaban ropa, alimentos y equipo táctico, propiedad de los presuntos sicarios.
The Battle of Ruiz is one of the coldest cartel wars ever witnessed by Mexico between two of the most brutal cartels in the country, the Sinaloa cartel and Los Zetas. Around the mid-2000s, the once peaceful Mexican state of Nayarit, known for its idyllic beach towns and serene resorts, plunged into chaos as drug trafficking organizations swarmed the region, eager to seize control. Initially, the violence seemed mild compared to other Mexican states, but that changed when the Zetas violently split from the Gulf Cartel. So to make a statement, dozens of Zeta soldiers swarmed the streets of Nayarit, turning every corner and neighborhood into a battleground with relentless bloodshed and terror. Guys, understand the state was engulfed by this violence, transforming it into a war zone overnight. And to name specific events, in October 2010, the same year Los Zetas split from the Gulf Cartel, more than 15 people at a car wash in Nayarit's capital city, Tepic, were killed by supposed Zetas gunmen. On top of that, 8 of these victims were partially burned, while the rest were dumped at the corner of a road. If that's not bad enough, this incident was followed by the state witnessing its highest number of deaths ever recorded. May 25, 2011, Sinaloa cartel hitmen ambushed members of Los Zetas traveling aboard pickup trucks traveling through Federal Highway 15 in Nayarit. Once the Zetas spotted them, a fierce gun battle ensued, resulting in the deaths of over 29 people in a span of a few hours. Authorities were alerted to the shootout by residents, and by the time they arrived, they found abandoned vehicles, high-caliber weapons, narco tanks, grenades, and a pile of dead bodies. Most corpses wore similar uniforms to that of the Zetas, making authorities believe the Sinaloa cartel got the best of those soldiers. Yet some civilians were caught in the crossfire, with one of them being identified as Guatemalan. And maybe as a retaliation for that clash, Zeta soldiers in the Mexican city of Monterrey set that casino on fire, killing 52 people, comprising of mothers and grandmothers who were there to play bingo. In total, close to 100 people died, were injured, or disappeared during the Battle of Ruiz, and today, that number is surging even higher.
Violence and murder are on the rise in Colombia.
Dio una imagen de lo que fuera el conflicto en Colombia y la coca manchada por la sangre de la gente.
The Colombian Drug War was a very brutal and complex conflict in Colombia, beginning with the rise of powerful drug cartels in the late 20th century. Among these, we have the Medellin and Cali cartel standing out as the most influential and notorious. Their operations, conflicts, and eventual downfall played a significant role in shaping Colombia's modern history. But how did all that happen? So in the late 70s, Pablo Escobar burst onto the scene, leading the Medellin cartel, and quickly would turn it into a powerhouse of cocaine trade. Now based in Medellin, Colombia, Escobar's cartel would dominate the market, controlling like 80% of the global supply. And these guys were known for their ruthless tactics: assassinations, bombings, bribery. It was all part of the playbook to maintain power and evade law enforcement. Escobar was so rich, his influence allowed him to infiltrate various levels of government and society. Plus, his plata o plomo approach meant that those who opposed him were either bribed or killed. So, by the mid-1980s, the Medellin cartel had become a major threat to the Colombian state, prompting a fierce response from the government and its allies, including the US. But while the Medellin cartel was out here grabbing headlines with its violent antics, another powerhouse was quietly rising: the Cali cartel. This cartel, led by the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers, opted for a different game plan. Now these guys were more like stealthy ninjas based out of Cali. They preferred sophistication over brute force, relying on bribery and corruption rather than flashy violence. By the late 1980s, the Cali cartel had grown to control a significant portion of the cocaine trade. Their operations were highly organized, with a focus on logistics and efficiency. Unlike Medellin, the Cali cartel avoided high-profile attacks and preferred to work behind the scenes, which allowed them to infiltrate various sectors of society, including law enforcement and the judiciary. Now, as both cartels would fight for dominance, the rivalry between them heats up, reaching its boiling point in the early 1990s. The Colombian government, backed by the United States, would ramp up efforts to dismantle these empires, and the streets really turned into a war zone. The turning point would come in 1993 when Escobar was taken down in a dramatic shootout with the Colombian National Police. His death actually marked the beginning of the end for the Medellin cartel, and in the following years, the Colombian government would shift its focus to dismantling the Cali cartel. And they did just that because by the mid-90s, almost every leader of the Cali cartel had either been captured or killed, effectively crippling their operations. But after the fall of these cartels, did the drug trade just pack up and leave? No, it just led to a bunch of smaller, more decentralized operations popping up. Thus, violence and instability still goes on. However, taking down these major players was a significant win for the Colombian government and its international allies. So the war might not be over, but things are far better than they once were for Colombians. The Kamora War was a chaotic and bloody conflict, centered around one of Italy's oldest and most notorious criminal organizations. You see, the Kamora group originated in the Campania region and has a history of violence, corruption, and turf wars that really left a mark on Italian society. But unlike the hierarchical structure of the mafia, the Kamora is composed of numerous clans, each vying for power and control. This trouble kicked off in the early 1980s when Raffaele Cutolo, head of the Nuova Camorra Organizzata, NCO, decided he wanted to unite the disparate Kamora clans under his rule. Naturally, that didn't sit well with the other clan leaders who preferred doing their own thing, so it led to an all-out war. Blood was spilling on both sides as alliances shifted and betrayals became the norm. One infamous instance of the Camora's ruthless tactics was the murder of Giacomo Frattini, known as Bambulella. Frattini, a former associate of Cutolo, was brutally killed in 1982 as part of this internal power struggle. His murder was orchestrated to send a clear message to anyone thinking of crossing Cutolo's NCO. There was the killing of Marcelo Torre, the mayor of Pajani. In 1980, Torre was assassinated because he refused to cooperate with the Camora's demands. His death was just a mere example, showing the group's influence and willingness to eliminate anyone standing in their way. But nonetheless, these killings were just the tip of the iceberg in a war marked by relentless violence and treachery. So as the 1980s rolled on, the internal strife within the Kamora led to more fragmentation. Cutolo's attempt to centralize power ultimately failed, and rival factions grew stronger. So by the late 80s, the war had taken its toll. We had thousands dead, and the remaining clans solidified their territories. And just when it seemed this war was going to be endless, Raffaele Cutolo and his associates all scattered. The fall came after one of Cutolo's men had either been arrested or murdered. Even Cutolo himself was serving a life sentence at this time. Now his fall didn't bring peace, instead it just opened the door for new leaders and more chaos. One of these new leaders, Carmine Alfieri, who tried bringing all the fractions of the organizations together, did have some success, but the violence never truly disappeared. Even today, the war still lingers, and the Camora's influence isn't just in Italy alone, but all over the world, partnered with every criminal organization you can think of.
And when these gangs clash, what kind of violence are we talking about here?
The gang wars in Brazil are fought both in the streets and in prison.
The drug gangs of Rio de Janeiro are like nothing I've ever seen before. They're much more like a militia or a terrorist organization.
You can hear the gunshots echoing through the alleyways, an operation on the ground and on the rooftops, targeting what they say were members of a drug trafficking gang in one of Rio's biggest favelas.
Now, the Brazilian drug wars have been a gritty, bloody saga, largely centered around two main players, the Primeiro Comando da Capital, aka the PCC, and the Comando Vermelho. These organizations have been vying for control of the lucrative drug trade, leaving a trail of chaos and violence in their wake. But this violence hasn't always been a problem for the Brazilian government. This all kicked back in the early 90s when the PCC, founded by Sao Paulo's prison system, started making waves. These guys weren't just any gang. They were an organized, disciplined outfit with a clear goal: to dominate the drug trade. And they simply didn't care about who stood in their way. Meanwhile, up in Rio de Janeiro, the CV was already a well-established player in the drug game. They were formed back in the 70s and had a reputation for being ruthless and were willing to do whatever it took to maintain its hold on the city's favelas. These guys were pioneers of the drug trade in Brazil, and they didn't take kindly to the PCC's growing influence. So as the PCC expanded its operations beyond Sao Paulo, tensions between the two groups escalated. In 2006, things took a particularly dark turn when the PCC orchestrated a series of coordinated attacks against police and public officials in Sao Paulo. This wasn't just a few isolated incidents. It was a full-on assault, leaving over 150 people dead in just 1 week. The violence confused civilians, but the message was clear. The PCC wasn't playing around. So the CV, not to be outdone, showed they could be just as brutal. In 2017, a prison riot in Manaus, orchestrated by the CV, would result in the deaths of 56 inmates, many of whom were PCC members. Now, this gruesome massacre was part of the ongoing battle for control of the drug routes in northern Brazil. And I gotta tell you right now, this wasn't just a fight over territory or drug trafficking routes, guys. No. It's well beyond that. It was a bloody struggle for supremacy, with both sides willing to go to extreme lengths to assert their dominance. However, despite numerous police crackdowns and government efforts to curb that violence, the conflict between the PCC and CV still rages on. In recent years, the war spilled over into other parts of Brazil, with smaller gangs now aligning themselves with either the PCC or CV, and this has led to an ever-widening web of violence that continues to plague this poor country. So it's safe to say the battle is far from over. And as long as there's money to be made, the bloodshed's likely to continue.
Si no está bien pintada la raya, la frontera entre autoridad y delincuencia, no se avanza.
December 11th, 2006. Mexico's newly elected president, Felipe Calderón, deploys over 6,000 Mexican army soldiers to his home state of Michoacán. Their mission? To end the drug violence. Now, the roots of Michoacán's drug conflict go way back to the 90s, when the Milenio Cartel and the Amazcua Cartel began selling crystal meth imported from Colombia through alliances with the Medellin and Cali cartels. Now, betrayal soon followed as some Milenio lieutenants defected to join the Gulf Cartel, another major Colombian drug distributor in Mexico. So by 2003, the drug trade in Michoacán had expanded significantly. The Gulf Cartel empowered its enforcer group, Los Zetas, and together with the vigilante group, La Familia Michoacana, they orchestrated various crimes, including a 2004 prison break in Apatzingán to free imprisoned members. Yet when Familia Michoacana's leader, Carlos Rosales Mendoza, was detained for his role in the raid, Nazario Moreno took over, declaring a turf war against rival cartels, and sparking the beginning of the drug war in Michoacán. So now President Felipe Calderón was elected president. He follows up on this operation, which has already been planned by his predecessor, Vicente Fox, and they get the deployment of troops to Michoacán, where drug-related violence had already claimed over 500 lives. These troops had to reclaim areas controlled by organized criminals, conduct raids, make arrests, and set up control points on the highways and secondary roads. This was the first time the Mexican government had launched a full-blown onslaught to combat drug cartels. It would mark the beginning of the infamous Mexican Drug War, as Calderón intensified his anti-drug efforts, deploying approximately 45,000 troops alongside state and federal police forces to bring every drug cartel down. By 2011, Mexico's military had detained over 11,000 individuals suspected of drug trafficking, which was a bit less than the previous year, when over 28,000 people were arrested. But at the same time, over 40,000 people had died since the beginning of this so-called drug war, with some saying the numbers are way higher. Now, some say Calderón robbed Mexicans of their human rights, since that strategy involved direct confrontation with the cartels, public executions, and torture by both cartels and government forces. His aim was to take out all the cartel leaders, but by doing so, he just created some sort of vacuum in their power hierarchy, and it resulted in violent infights among junior cartel members vying for control. Cartels just became more aggressive, and for some of them, like Sinaloa, more powerful. Plus, some of Calderón's soldiers turned on him, accepting bribes right away to sabotage the government's efforts. And by the end of Calderon's tenure, his administration claimed that around 6,000 drug-related homicides occurred during his 6 years as president. But those numbers are way off, because outside sources claim that over 120,000 murders happened in that period. Now just think about that for a moment. 120,000 people who once had families, homes, jobs, and above all, vibrant lives. What'd they die for? You know, it's staggering to contemplate the death toll and the number of casualties recorded in each cartel war mentioned in this video. Meanwhile, the masterminds behind the violence, the cartel leaders, live in luxury as thousands die for their gain. Guys, the war in Mexico is outrageous. But even more outrageous is the insatiable demand for these drugs. Because without this high demand, there would be no war and no cartels. So as long as the US market keeps on craving these substances, cartels are going to thrive, guys, and countless lives will be lost in the process.